Hello, everyone. My name is Marija Maric, and I'm an architect and researcher based in Luxembourg. First of all, I would like to thank Urban Dig Project and Metaxia Markaki for the invitation to join you in this exciting performative experiment. I regret for not being in Athens with you today, but I'm happy to be part of this project, at least virtually. We start here with the question, who owns the land? In the context of hyper-commodification of land and housing, that almost exclusively defines us all, regardless of the part of the world we are living in, this question becomes perhaps the most important one to be asked. But it is also important how we ask this question. Where do we look for answers? I'm interested in looking into how the ways in which we talk reveal not only desires and imaginaries of ownership, but also how this language itself could have a performative role in legitimizing, normalizing, and materializing these imaginaries. One such type of language are advertisements for land and real estate. In my work, I argue that they could be seen as an active construction site where entire projects, including land as a project of private ownership, are made by the means of narrative, storytelling, and above all, fiction. Imagine owning land. Buy, trade, bid, analyze, claim land now. Expanding purposes behind virtual land. Increasing demand and value for that land. Things you can use your land for. Search, claim, purchase, or bid on any piece of land. Name the land you purchase and the land you own. Create more purpose and utility for land. Be sure to claim your own land. Virtual land generating different types of resources. Virtual land will increase in value over time much the same way that physical land does. Pressure to claim land. Claim ownership of virtual land. These are the lines extracted from the advertisements of Earth 2, a digital platform that sells and trades virtual land that geographically corresponds to that on the analog Earth, and which are composed into a real estate poem I named here Land 1. This short lecture takes precisely this language as its point of departure, asking, could real estate and land advertisements be considered as a legitimate source of knowledge for writing architectural and urban histories of contemporary cities? What is the role of speculative language in real estate and land speculation? And how do we approach this language, whose nomadic and ephemeral nature escapes disciplinary inquiries and which often falls outside of the scope of architectural analysis? Here, I outline a method, namely real estate poetry, as a curatorial approach to advertising language and a tool for dissecting corporate imaginaries of urban futures. The goal of such methodological construction is to offer a possible entry point into reading these overlooked narratives and to find ways to bring this knowledge into conversations on the production of the built environment today. Real estate poetry is an ambitious and paradoxical claim of a literary genre, one that is based only on real estate advertisements. Ads, seen as ephemeral texts soon to be obsolete after the real estate product is sold, are collected and transcribed, displaced as ready-mades, and reread as pieces of fiction and poetry. Describing the visual world of low-resolution copies, thumbnails, and previews that emerged with the proliferation of the internet, artist and theorist Hito Stern introduced the concept of a poor image. Compressed and pixelated free versions of the original, she observed how, I quote, poor images are poor because they are not assigned any value within the class society of images. They tend towards abstraction, not only in terms of bad image quality, but also in terms of their ephemeral existence, anonymous production, and fragmented distribution. Nevertheless, curated, edited, and maintained by various online communities, they are successfully destabilizing traditional understandings of authorship, distribution, and property. In this light, Stern calls for new ways of defining the value of an image, value that goes beyond resolutions and art markets and is instead based on spread, speed, and distribution capacity. Poor image reminds us that digital information is no longer about authenticity and originality. Instead, as she further points out, I quote, "It is about its own real conditions of existence, about swarm circulation, digital dispersion, fractured and flexible temporalities. In short, it is about reality." Starting from poor images, we turn towards poor texts, poor not in the nature of their production, but rather in their anonymity, ephemerality, and lack of value, with an attempt to understand real estate advertisements as forms of infrastructure that circulate architecture as an information and a form of capital. Real estate ads, perhaps more than any other writings on buildings, land, and cities, are also about their own conditions of existence: fast circulation, far-reaching dispersion, and universal language. In short, about architectural reality. And although real estate advertisements probably constitute most of the existing body of texts written on architecture, cities, and land, still, these real estate fictions are often neglected or excluded from discussions. Here we could ask, what would happen if we were to invert this logic and try to bring this vast, overlooked material into consideration? How would one approach such a task? Could we, by displacing these narratives from their natural habitats, such as advertising brochures and websites, into books and journals, find a way to reread them, only this time as containers of knowledge on architectures and cities, and potential archives on the production of space in a real estate media complex? Commodified, architecture and land move around as real estate. Their modes of distribution, dispersion, and travel constitute their invisible others. And while the reality of buildings and land after the design work is done is mostly shaped by developers and real estate agents, as well as by the institutions of property, profit, and speculation, the question remains open. How do their fictions and magical visions play a role both in the construction of our collective urban imaginaries and in the histories of architecture and cities more broadly? Real estate poetry is an attempt to tackle and include those other histories, histories of anonymous production and speculative distribution of buildings and land that are at the very base of not only professional architectural reality, but also everyday life. It starts from recognizing the ways in which speculative language of real estate developers appropriates not only our attention, but also takes part in the construction of social and spatial relations. Real estate poetry thus takes precisely appropriation as its central tool. It is made in the acts of reframing, renaming, unsighting, reproducing, retyping, curating, and publishing again. Discussing his work based on the practices of plagiarism, copying, and appropriation, American poet Kenneth Goldsmith wrote, I quote, "When retyping a book, I often stop and ask myself if what I'm doing is really writing. As I sit there in front of the computer screen, punching keys, the answer is invariably yes." Following from here, we could say that to appropriate real estate advertisements means to recognize their vastness and free flow as digital objects. To retype them, however, means to appropriate them in detail, not just to take over the text, but to take every word of it. In other words, retyping real estate advertisements could be seen as an act of writing them again, only this time as pieces of real estate poetry. With communication preceding rather than succeeding architectural and urban design, in the era of global circulation of capital, goods, information, and people, it becomes clear that we need new methods and new research tools to understand critically the transformation of boundaries between built landscapes and their mediascapes, as well as to extend our understanding of the multiplicity of sites on which built environment is being produced today. One such site is also the speculative language of land and real estate. In finding the ways to bring this language into discussions on the production and transformation of urban space today, we could start by asking, what is the relationship between the built and the narrative, between the notion of the land and its media, the hardware and software, and how are architects, planners, and citizens to mediate these materialities critically? Could we, by using the very tools of real estate, learn to understand its mechanisms more productively? How to tackle productive fictions of global capital? Can fiction itself serve as a tool? Could we, through the act of decontextualization, achieve the opposite, namely contextualize real estate fictions within architectural and political discussions? What would their archives look like? And finally, who would claim to be their authority? Real estate developers or real estate poets? Thank you very much and enjoy the show.